Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omniviewer, and it's time to enter the bizarre world of propaganda filmmaking with one of the most infamous kaiju movies ever made, North Korea's 1985 Pulgasari, a movie with a backstory as fascinating as its execution.
Okay, so here's the deal. North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il was a lifelong Godzilla fan, which was his only redeeming quality. He was such a fan, in fact, that he wanted to promote his regime by making his own Godzilla movie, one that would depict him as a heroic kaiju leading the people to a glorious future. So naturally, he set about this task by kidnapping South Korean actress Choi Yun-hee, then subsequently kidnapping her husband, director Shin Sang-ok, and forcing them to make it lest something bad happen to her.
You know, that's exactly the kind of rational decision I'd expect from a man who claimed to be descended from unicorns.
There were actually several films the couple were forced to make under the regime, but the last of the bunch was Pulgasari, a movie this image proclaims was banned in America. It must not have been that banned, seeing as how this is the American VHS box cover.
Recently, it's also become available for streaming and made-on-demand DVD through Amazon, so I finally got me a copy to watch.
The story is set in feudal Korea and tells of a small, poor village where the governor, by order of the king, demands metal to be made into weapons. To this end, he has his men come and take all the metal from the town, including farming tools and cooking pots. However, the blacksmith defies his orders by giving the stolen metal back to the people and telling them to hide it. This leads to him being imprisoned and starved, a tragic scene underscored by the worst synthesizer music I have ever heard.
So this was the music chosen to represent feudal Korea, was it? You know, if the synth was part of a larger metal band, that'd be one thing, but on its own, it's just tacky.
When the blacksmith's daughter and son, Ami and Anna respectively, toss some rice into his cell, he does not eat it, but instead molds it into a surprisingly pristine little statue of the metal-eating spirit Pulgasari, and with his dying breath wishes for it to guide his people to a brighter future. The statue winds up in the hands of his children, and a drop of Ami's blood brings it to life.
I have to admit, as kaiju origins go, that's unique. Weird, but unique.
Little Pulgasari starts growing at an alarming rate by eating whatever metal he can get his hands on.
Now I know what you're all thinking, but be patient. I'll address it when the time is right.
Pulgasari wanders off for a bit, and the people stage a successful coup against the governor, which draws the attention of the king. He sends the army to surround the rebels' mountaintop encampment and starve them into submission.
Starving people into submission seems to be a favored tactic for the villains of this flick.
However, it is when all seems lost that Pulgasari reappears, having grown into something that looks like the obese love child of a minotaur and an alligator. Feeding on the metal of the enemy's weapons, Pulgasari continues growing to an impressive stature, and try as they might, all the king's horses and all the king's men just can't seem to kill him.
You would think a monster made out of rice would be a pushover, yet Pulgasari proves impervious to every assassination attempt.
They try burning him, but that just gets him all hot and bothered. They try exorcising and burying him, but a drop of Ami's blood gets him back on his feet. Finally, they try using cannons, but that plan winds up literally backfiring.
Just look for yourselves. Getting to experience ridiculous stuff like that is part of what makes this job so much fun.
So as you can imagine, Pulgasari wins the day by killing the tyrannical king and his henchmen.
The people are finally free, and they all lived happily ever after. Or they would have if this is where the movie stopped, but we're not quite at the end just yet.
It doesn't take long for everyone to realize that Pulgasari is still hungry, and if he is to keep protecting them, he must be fed more metal. So the people bring all of the metal they can find to him, starting with everything in the palace, and then moving on to their farming and cooking equipment.
I'm sure you see the irony, pun not intended. After all, what started this whole mess in the first place?
That's right, the tyrannical governor demanding that the people give up their metal for his own consumption. Now their savior is doing the exact same thing, and the people feel obligated to serve him in this way because of what he did for them.
It's clear to me the blacksmith didn't really think this plan of his through, but director Shin Sang-ok did. Oh yes, he knew exactly what he was doing.
Like I said, this was the last movie he was forced to make before he and Choi Yun-hee fled to America, and he gave Pulgasari this twist as a blatant act of defiance against his captors. This twist is not a sudden development either. The first act of the film clearly foreshadows Pulgasari's eventual turn. We know from the beginning that he eats metal, which is something the people could not give up without hurting their livelihoods, and he takes whatever he wants. One of the first things he does is eat the lock off the door to Ami and Anna's home, which they really need for safety's sake. The last time we see him before he briefly disappears from the movie, he carries off farming equipment and deliberately ignores the kids telling him he can't eat those and that he needs to come back with them. "I'm not listening to you. Just try and stop me. I double dog dare you to try stopping me."
Ergo, when the rebels ally themselves with Pulgasari later, even knowing that he eats metal, it's clear they aren't really thinking ahead. Like most rebellions throughout history, their desire to win today prevents them from planning for tomorrow. And with that simple mistake, their savior becomes their tyrant. In other words, meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Ami realizes the full horror of what's to come. Eventually, there won't be any metal left in Korea to feed Pulgasari, so he will force the people to invade other countries, which would make them just as bad, if not worse, than the late king. Even if some countries fall easily, others will fight back, and the next thing you know, the world is engulfed in a war that will wipe out all mankind.
I would like to remind everyone at this juncture that Pulgasari the monster was meant to represent Kim Jong-il. So, clearly the dragon must be slain. But how do you kill something that has so far proven invincible?
Well, Ami hides inside a giant belt that Pulgasari eats, which turns him to stone that crumbles, and the tiny version of him that remains turns into cartoon energy and flies into her dead body.
Well, the important thing is that it works.
So in the end, that which was meant to be a glorification of a dictator's regime became a condemnation of it. There was a strong chance that Shin Sang-ok and Choi Yun-hee could have been killed for this defiance, but luckily for them, they had escaped to America before anyone caught on.
Think about what a risk that was. You're probably nervous to ask your boss for a raise, and here this couple found a way to defy the tyrant who had abducted them and held them prisoner for years. That takes guts. They could have been killed if they were caught. Man, talk about bravery, right?
Sometime after that, Shin was involved in making The Legend of Golgameth, which has the exact same plot as Pulgasari, but since it's for kids, it makes the monster the true hero and isn't nearly as scathing.
Whenever I bring up this movie in conversation with friends, one question always pops up. Why has no one made a movie about the making of Pulgasari yet? That's a legitimate question because it's the sort of story that you'd think most directors in Hollywood would be chomping at the bit to bring to the screen. Can you imagine someone like Steven Spielberg or Kenneth Branagh adapting this story to film? That's something I want to see.
What about Pulgasari as a movie? I've seen a lot of reviews that call it genuinely bad, and even more that call it just plain boring. But personally, I find it fascinating. Usually when a propaganda film subverts its own message, it's by accident. Pulgasari is one of those rare examples of a deliberate subversion, and one of the few movies in existence which can be classified as a true act of defiance against tyranny. That alone makes it worthwhile.
It's definitely not high art. It's a fantasy kaiju movie through and through. But warts and all, I'm glad to have it as part of my collection. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omniviewer, signing off. You know, I have to wonder if Kim Jong-il ever thought it was suspicious that the heroic monster meant to represent him looked like the devil. Wasn't exactly subtle, was it?